They erased it from the books, silenced it in the media, but not here. Welcome to Tales of Black, the stories you were never supposed to see.
Imagine fighting for your freedom, really feeling that promise of liberty almost within your grasp, only to find yourself still trapped. Legally bound, economically ensnared, facing terror, pretty much everywhere you turn. What do you do? What do you do when that promise, that thing you fought so hard for, is just brutally betrayed?
It's a profound question, isn't it? Really agonizing. And it's one that ultimately defined, a really pivotal moment for thousands of African Americans right after the Civil War. Their answer, it was this extraordinary act of collective self-determination, the Exoduster movement.
That's right. And our deep dive today, it isn't just about people suddenly deciding to leave. We're looking at the first large-scale migration of African Americans after the war.
Right.
It was a profound act of resistance. Really.
Yeah.
A desperate quest for true autonomy, and maybe even a complete reimagining of what freedom could actually look like.
Exactly. And we've been digging into some really rich sources for this detailed analysis, looking at, everything. The root causes pushing them out of the South, that incredibly challenging journey west.
Yeah, the journey itself.
The sheer effort involved in building completely new communities, basically from scratch. And then, of course, the powerful, lasting legacy they left behind.
So our mission today is to really unpack those complex forces, right? The interlocking things that fueled this desperate exodus. We want to explore the symbolism, like why Kansas? What drew them there specifically?
That symbolism is key.
And then maybe most importantly, highlight the incredible resilience they showed. I mean, literally building new lives, new institutions from the ground up, all while facing just immense hardship on a really challenging frontier.
And as we unpack this chapter, you might find some surprising insights. It's a part of American history that, frankly, often gets overlooked, doesn't it?
It really does.
But it holds so many lessons for us today. It's a testament to the human spirit's will. Indomitable, really.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's understand the sheer urgency behind it all, the complete collapse of Reconstruction in the South, and just the terrifying plight of Black people there.
Indeed. That period right after the Civil War, say roughly 1865 to 1877, it was genuinely revolutionary, but tragically brief. It was a moment of real hope for nearly 4 million newly freed people. For a little while, it honestly seemed like a new dawn was breaking.
And that hope, it wasn't just wishful thinking. It was grounded in fundamental legal changes, wasn't it? Like the 13th Amendment, that didn't just abolish slavery in theory.
No, it dismantled the whole legal structure.
Exactly. The entire apparatus of human bondage. And you get the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship, equal protection under the law, for everyone born or naturalized here, including formerly enslaved people.
Crucial protections.
And then the 15th, specifically guaranteeing voting rights, regardless of race. These weren't abstract ideas, they were concrete legal shifts, designed to completely change the landscape for African Americans, offering this vision of real equality.
Precisely. And what's truly remarkable and often forgotten is that for the first time in U.S. history, Black Americans weren't just participating in politics, they were leading. During congressional Reconstruction, with the backing of federal troops and policy, Black leaders, often educated folks, clergymen, lawyers, teachers, they were actually elected to state legislatures, even the U.S. Congress.
Yeah, our sources call it an unprecedented flowering of Black political power.
It really was.
And that's a key distinction, right? We're not talking about just a few token figures here.
Not at all.
These were people like Senators Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce from Mississippi, Representative Robert B. Elliott of South Carolina. They held genuinely significant offices. They were influencing laws, advocating for their communities.
They proved demonstrably that Black self-governance wasn't some far-off dream. It was a tangible reality. It worked. For about a decade, you had African Americans navigating these really complex political landscapes, often building coalitions, laying groundwork for actual democratic governance in the South.
And we shouldn't forget the Freedmen's Bureau either. That was vital, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely vital. Established by Congress in '65, its mandate was huge, providing food, housing, education, legal protection, not just for formerly enslaved people, but also impoverished whites. It helped mediate labor contracts, set up schools, reunited families. It offered this tangible vision of an integrated, equitable future for people just emerging from generations of bondage. It was the federal government actively trying to create conditions for Black autonomy.
But then Then came the devastating blow, a betrayal that would just echo down the generations, that promise of freedom, of equality. It was brutally undermined in 1877.
The Compromise of 1877.
Exactly. That contentious presidential election, 1876, Hayes versus Tilden, deeply disputed. It led to this political deal. And the key part, in exchange for Hayes getting the presidency, the last federal troops were pulled out of the South.
And that action, it marked the de facto end of Reconstruction. It was a political death knell for any federal protection of Black civil rights. With no federal oversight, these white-dominated Southern governments, often led by former Confederates that called themselves Redeemers, they just swiftly regained full political control, and they immediately started dismantling every single advance African Americans had made.
It wasn't slow, was it?
No, not a gradual erosion. It was deliberate, rapid, a complete reversal of power and policy.
And what's so striking and just profoundly tragic is that the main catalyst for the Exodus wasn't just the absence of rights. It was the awful, excruciating emotional experience of having those rights granted.
Seeing what was possible.
Seeing what was possible, tasting real freedom, and then having it violently, systematically ripped away. That dynamic loss, that stark contrast between the initial hope and the betrayal that followed, it fueled this incredibly deep, specific kind of despair in Black communities, a psychological wound.
Precisely. That's the critical insight here. The Exodus wasn't just a response to not having rights, but to the betrayal of a promise that had seemed, however briefly, within reach. Reconstruction, even for that short time, showed that a just, integrated society was possible. The troop withdrawal wasn't just political, it was a clear signal. The federal government, the guarantor of these new rights, was abandoning its role.
Abandoning them.
Leaving African Americans completely exposed politically and physically to their former enslavers and a hostile white population. This created that profound dynamic despair, the agony of seeing what could be, only to have it violently snatched away. This unique psychological blow, you could argue it was the true engine of the Exodus. It shows how shattering hope can be an even more powerful motivator for change than just deprivation alone.
So that despair wasn't static. It was this dynamic process of loss, a spiral down from aspiration to just desperation. Our sources really emphasize that the situation for organized Black resistance reached a level of desperation because they had seen what could be.
They built it.
They'd actively built it and then watched it get systematically dismantled with absolutely no federal help coming. That swift, brutal shift from hope to despair was probably the most crucial psychological factor driving that mass migration. It just created an unlivable reality that demanded a completely new solution.
And with that hope gone, the South quickly constructed what you can only really call a meticulously designed architecture of oppression. Basically re-enslaving Black people by other means. It was this comprehensive system operating on three insidious fronts: legal enslavement, economic peonage, and political disenfranchisement. A web designed to trap and control.
Okay, let's break that down. Start with the legal side. Right after the war, even before the federal government fully flexed its muscle, Southern states started implementing these Black codes.
Almost immediately.
And they were pretty overtly disguised slave codes, weren't they? They severely restricted Black movement needing passes to travel, controlled their labor through these harsh, coercive contracts, often locking them in for a year.
Yeah, and vagrancy laws.
Right. They even criminalized unemployment through cruel vagrancy laws, which basically meant if a Black person wasn't working for a white landowner, they could be arrested and forced into labor anyway.
While these codes were sort of suppressed during congressional Reconstruction, they really laid the grim groundwork for the much more systematic Jim Crow laws that started popping up and solidifying after 1877. Jim Crow institutionalized racial segregation in, well, pretty much every aspect of public life. It mandated separate but equal facilities, which in reality always meant vastly inferior treatment and facilities for Black people.
Always inferior.
It wasn't accidental. It was designed, point blank, to constantly reinforce that racial hierarchy.
And it got into everything. No aspect of life was untouched. We're talking railway cars, schools, restaurants, public restrooms, even things you might not immediately think of, like drinking fountains, cemeteries.
Even Bibles in court.
Exactly. The specific Bibles used to swear oaths in court. Can you imagine the psychological weight of that? Standing in a courtroom, swearing an oath on a Bible designated only for Black people? It was about enforcing this pervasive, inferior status from cradle to grave, stripping away dignity at every single turn.
And then economically, The newly freed people were just cast into freedom with absolutely nothing. No land, no capital, no resources. Despite, their immense contributions to building the Southern economy through generations of unpaid labor.
A deliberate denial.
Absolutely deliberate. It forced most into sharecropping or tenancy, often ironically right back on the very plantations where they'd been enslaved, renting land, tools, supplies from former owners, paying back a share of their crop.
And that debt cycle. It was absolutely brutal, a real economic trap. Laws like North Carolina's Landlord and Tenant Act of 1876, combined with these incredibly high-interest loans for supplies, crop liens giving landlords first dibs on the harvest.
Yeah.
It created this inescapable cycle of debt.
Yeah, if your crop failed or prices just dropped.
You were deeper in debt.
Deeper in debt. It carried over year after year, often getting bigger. It essentially tied laborers to white-owned land. It's that system historian Carter G. Woodson so aptly called slavery in a modified form. They were trapped by economic chains, plain and simple.
And politically, their voice was just systematically silenced, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Despite the 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote.
Completely silenced. Southern states used a whole toolbox of discriminatory methods. You had insidious poll taxes requiring a fee to vote that many impoverished black citizens just couldn't afford.
Literacy test, too.
Oh yeah, biased literacy tests, often administered totally unfairly. A black voter might be asked to interpret some complex legal jargon, while a white voter got a simple task or was just waved through. And complex registration requirements, like North Carolina's Payne election law, with multiple ballot boxes, confusing instructions, it all just further disenfranchised black Americans. It ensured they had absolutely no legal means to fight the oppressive system being built around them.
What's so fascinating and deeply disturbing is how these things weren't isolated. They weren't separate problems.
No, it was a
It
system.
was an integrated, comprehensive system of control. The main goal of the Redeemer South was crystal clear. Restore the pre-war social and economic order, especially its racial hierarchy, but just without the legal institution of slavery.
And to do that, they meticulously recreated the core functions of slavery. Sharecropping. That ensures a dependent, cheap farm labor force controlling economic destiny. Vagrancy laws punish anyone who dares leave their assigned labor role, controlling movement.
Jim Crow.
Jim Crow enforces daily subservience, prevents any hint of social equality, cementing the racial hierarchy. And disenfranchisement, combined with a legal system run by former Confederates, eliminated any peaceful way for Black Americans to challenge it. It was complete system of subjugation, total control.
So if you were an African American in the South then, you were utterly trapped. Economic escape, blocked by debt, lack of resources, political escape, thwarted by disenfranchisement, social escape from segregation and inferiority, just impossible. This comprehensive imprisonment. It meant that physical escape migration became, for so many, the only path left to find real freedom and dignity. And if that whole complex architecture of oppression wasn't enough, the entire system was underpinned by a brutal, terrifying reign of terror. The collapse of federal protection just unleashed this wave of unchecked, often horrific violence across the South. And let's be clear, this wasn't random lawlessness, this was organized terror. Carried out by white supremacist groups like the KKK, the White League, the Knights of the White Camellia, their methods were deliberate, chilling.
The sources describe it as just endemic.
Systematic. We're talking brutal torture, public lynchings designed to send a terrifying message, even mass murders.
All carried out with near impunity.
Exactly. Because local law enforcement, the courts, they were often complicit or just looked the other way. The spike in these acts after the federal troops left was stark. Just for context, while it's hard to get exact numbers, historical records show over 1,000 known lynchings between 1900 and 1914 alone. And countless other acts of violence just went unrecorded. It created this constant, terrifying atmosphere.
And the main goal of this violence, it wasn't just random cruelty, it was fundamentally about political and economic subjugation. It was, as our sources put it, a war of terror, aimed at assassinating or intimidating Black and white Republican officials, stopping Black people from voting, stopping them from seeking education, or gaining any kind of independent economic foothold. It was designed literally to force them back into subservient labor roles.
Yeah, the term bulldozing. For many Exodusters fleeing that bulldozing, that brutal, overwhelming repression and intimidation, that was the number one most immediate reason they left. They were desperate just to escape the physical threat to their lives.
And this raises a really important question. Was this just the work of, rogue extremists operating outside the law?
It sounds like maybe not.
Our sources make it abundantly clear, no. Post-Reconstruction violence wasn't just acts by fringe groups. It was an extra-legal form of governance, implicitly sanctioned, often directly supported by these redeemer governments to achieve white political dominance. The legal system, controlled by former Confederates, almost never prosecuted these crimes. It effectively granted a license for violence.
So effectively, the Exodusters weren't just escaping individual criminals, they were refugees. Refugees fleeing a political system that used terror as a primarily integrated tool of rule.
Exactly. That level of systemic state-sanctioned violence made staying in the South simply unlivable for many. They truly felt they had no other option but to seek a new beginning somewhere else.
Okay, so if the South was creating this unbearable push factor, making life intolerable, what was the powerful pull that drew them specifically west to Kansas? That brings us to the Kansas Dream. Kansas wasn't just a place on a map, was it? It became this incredibly potent symbol of hope, a tangible opportunity for a new start, embodying the very ideals that had just been crushed back home.
It was this unique confluence, really. Pragmatic land policy on one hand, and deep historical symbolism on the other. It created what people quickly started calling Kansas fever. It transformed this frontier state, which for many was totally unknown territory, into a promised land in their imagination, an almost mythic destination for thousands of African Americans.
And right at the heart of the practical side was the Homestead Act of 1862. That was truly revolutionary legislation, wasn't it? Especially in the context of the Civil War.
Absolutely. It offered 160 acres of public land to any qualified citizen or even someone intending to become a citizen over 21, head of a household.
For just a small fee, basically.
The tiny filing fee. They just had to live on it, cultivate it, improve it for 5 straight years. It was an unprecedented offer of opportunity, especially for people with nothing.
And what made it so incredibly appealing to African Americans was that the act was essentially colorblind, right?
That's the key. It was open to all eligible citizens, including newly freed slaves, especially once the 14th Amendment guaranteed their citizenship. This was just a stark, radical contrast to the South, where land ownership for Black people was systematically denied through violence, debt, legal tricks, keeping them tied to the land of their former enslavers.
So this provided a direct, legal, viable path to economic independence through owning land. The very foundation of American citizenship, of wealth building that had been denied to them for centuries. For someone trapped in that sharecropping debt cycle, basically enslaved by economic peonage, owning their own farm. It must seem like an answer to prayers.
Literally, it meant control over their own labor, the ability to build some intergenerational wealth for their families, and a definitive permanent break from that exploitative plantation economy.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the Homestead Act kind of offered the missing piece of emancipation, didn't it?
That's a great way to put it. The promise of 40 acres and a mule right after the war, which would have given freed people a real economic foundation, that never happened.
Never materialized.
But here, the Homestead Act, offering a much larger 160 acres, it allowed Exodusters to actively complete their own liberation, to seize the economic independence that should have come with legal freedom, but which the federal government largely failed to deliver. It empowered them to take destiny into their own hands.
But Kansas wasn't just about the practical offer of land. It held this profoundly sacred, symbolic meaning in the African American imagination too.
Deeply symbolic. This was the state, remember, that had fought and bled bleeding Kansas to enter the Union as a free state. Its very soil felt consecrated by that struggle against slavery.
And the legacy of John Brown.
Exactly. The memory of the radical abolitionist martyr John Brown, who had fiercely fought pro-slavery forces right there in Kansas. It gave the land a near-sacred holiness for many Black people. They saw Kansas as this righteous destination, a place that had truly earned its freedom through blood and sacrifice. That history gave it this deep spiritual resonance, making it feel like a predestined haven.
And the migrants themselves, they powerfully framed their journey in these deeply resonant biblical terms, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. They called themselves Exodusters, drawing that direct parallel to the ancient Israelites. They saw themselves undertaking a great exodus from the oppressive Egypt of the South.
Led by God's hand.
Led by a divine hand towards the promised land, or New Canaan of Kansas. This millennialist perspective, this belief they were part of a divinely guided journey to a better future, it imbued that incredibly hard journey with profound spiritual meaning. It helped them endure unimaginable hardships, unimaginable uncertainties by seeing themselves as actors in this larger divine drama. It gave purpose to their immense suffering.
So you see that unique blend, right? The practicality of free land from the Homestead Act gave them the means, a tangible path to self-sufficiency. But Kansas's symbolic history, sanctified by John Brown's blood, magnified by that powerful Exodus narrative that provided the meaning, a spiritual and historical imperative.
It's that powerful combination, the pragmatic and the profound, that really fueled Kansas fever and made the state such an irresistible destination for so many.
Now, the movement itself, it had this fascinating dual structure, didn't it? You had these charismatic promoters spreading the word, but also this powerful, decentralized grassroots thing happening, driven by sheer desperation and hope.
Absolutely. Benjamin Pap Singleton, a former slave from Tennessee, he was a key figure in that earlier, more organized phase. He shrewdly called himself the Moses of the colored exodus, actively recruiting, guiding migrants.
He was quite proactive, wasn't he?
Incredibly proactive. He formed the Edgefield Real Estate and Homestead Association back in 1874, specifically to promote migration, help people settle. He distributed flyers, famously titled Ho for Kansas, urging black farmers, laborers to leave the South. He was instrumental in establishing these all-black settlements like Singleton and Dunlap, primarily attracting migrants from Tennessee who are often better organized, specifically seeking land.
But then that huge great exodus of 1879, it was much more spontaneous, more grassroots, wasn't it?
Much more. Totally chaotic. Many just packed up and left with whatever few possessions they could carry, embarked on these incredibly arduous journeys. And it's really crucial to distinguish this wave from the steadier, decade-long migration of about 26,000 people through the 1870s. Those folks, often from upper South states, were usually a bit better prepared, more deliberate. The 1879 wave was different. It was a sudden, overwhelming surge of thousands of impoverished refugees, often arriving with literally nothing but the clothes on their backs.
And here's what's really remarkable. This mass movement, it even went against the advice of established national black leaders, people like Frederick Douglass, who was hugely influential.
Yeah, Douglass vehemently argued against it.
He believed black Americans should stay in the South, fight for their rights where they were. The fact that this movement happened anyway, it just highlights the profoundly bottom-up nature of it all. It shows the intelligent self-assessment, the decisive action of ordinary, often uneducated agricultural laborers. They made their own informed decisions, challenged the very idea that they needed elite leadership to act in their own best interest. They knew their own suffering, and they decided on their own solutions.
So once they got there, the migration to Kansas wasn't really an end in itself, was it? It was a means to a much bigger end: autonomy. The right to control their own political, economic, social destiny, free from white interference. The settlements they founded out on the prairie, they weren't just shelters. They were, in essence, laboratories of autonomy, experiments in self-governance.
In these laboratories, they took that abstract yearning for freedom and turned it into the tangible reality of self-governing communities, building from scratch the very institutions, churches, schools, businesses, civic groups they'd been systematically denied back in the South. It was a conscious act of creation.
And the most prominent, the most enduring symbol of this experiment is Nicodemus, founded in 1877, Graham County, Kansas. It was explicitly promoted as a place where African Americans could establish a self-governing black government, a place where they'd be the majority, hold all the power, free from the racialized politics of the South.
Nicodemus holds such a unique, powerful place in history. It's the oldest and remarkably the only remaining all-black town west of the Mississippi founded during this period.
It really is remarkable.
The beginnings were incredibly harsh. Many of the early settlers, mostly from Kentucky, arrived in this remote, treeless, often barren land. They faced immense hardship, living in crude dugouts carved into hillsides, sod houses built from prairie dirt, truly starting from nothing.
But despite those immense, daunting challenges, the town thrived through sheer determination. By its peak in the mid-1880s, it hit a population of maybe 600, 700 people, became this bustling center of activity. It had its own newspapers, a thriving general store, multiple churches, a hotel, various other businesses. It was just a testament to their collective will to create a vibrant, self-sufficient community against all odds.
And Nicodemus wasn't totally unique, though it was the biggest. It was part of a wider movement, right? One of about 20 largely black towns founded out west during this time.
That's right. We mentioned Benjamin Pap Singleton was involved in founding Dunlap. Other Exodusters formed distinct neighborhoods in existing cities like Topeka, the community known as Tennessee Town emerged there. In total, black migrants acquired over 20,000 acres in Kansas during this period, establishing a really significant presence on the land.
For the founding of these all-black towns, it was fundamentally a radical act, wasn't it? A spatial and political secession, almost.
It really was. A conscious, deliberate rejection of forced integration into a hostile white society that only offered second-class citizenship, if that. The goal was explicit: create spaces where Black people controlled their own political, economic, social institutions without white interference. In the South, they faced constant white surveillance control. Even in the supposedly freer North, they often faced discrimination, were pushed into secondary roles. These towns offered a true escape.
And establishing an all-black town just inverted the power dynamic they'd always known. It created this geography of freedom where Black people were the majority, held all the positions of power, town council, sheriff, everything. This didn't just provide physical safety from white violence, which was huge. It offered profound psychological liberation from the daily humiliations of Jim Crow. The town itself became this powerful political statement, a tangible model of Black self-determination in action.
And within these laboratories of autonomy, what did they prioritize? Building the pillars of civil society. Churches, especially AME and Baptist, were among the very first, most enduring structures built in Nicodemus and elsewhere. They weren't just places of worship, they were true community centers. Political forums where they debated pressing issues, social hubs where decisions got made, where community cohesion was strengthened. It's no surprise many leaders of the Exodus came right out of the clergy, like Reverend W.H. Smith, one of Nicodemus's founders.
And right alongside churches was education. Seen as absolutely fundamental, right? A tool of liberation.
Absolutely fundamental. Having been denied the right to literacy, formal education under slavery, Exodusters placed an incredibly high value on educating their children. They understood it was essential for real freedom, for advancement. They quickly established their own schools, like Nicodemus District School Number 1. It was a fundamental act of community building, equipping the next generation for advancement and for full citizenship in a way they themselves never had the chance.
And beyond churches and schools, they created this rich, vibrant civic life too, establishing mutual aid societies, a crucial social safety net for those in need. Organizing public celebrations like Nicodemus's annual Emancipation Celebration, a powerful assertion of their freedom, founding their own newspapers, various businesses, truly creating a complete, self-sustaining social fabric.
And this wasn't just random community building, it was highly deliberate, a conscious effort to build the very pillars of civil society from which they had been systematically excluded back south. Every school was a direct refutation of anti-literacy laws. Every church meeting, a reclamation of freedom of assembly, every Black-owned business, a crucial step away from the economic peonage of sharecropping. Community building itself was a profound daily act of political resistance.
Okay, let's talk about the economy of independence. The foundational dream for most Exoduster communities was farming, right? On their 160-acre homesteads. But that proved really tough.
Immensely challenging. Many arrived in Kansas just impoverished, lacking any capital for basic tools, seeds, livestock, starting a farm from scratch under those conditions. A colossal undertaking.
Plus the land itself. It wasn't always the best, was it?
No, often marginal, especially in upland Kansas. It was often the land overlooked by the railroad companies, by earlier white speculators who'd already claimed the most fertile spots. They had to adapt their farming skills, learned in the humid, fertile South, to this vastly different, dry, windy plains environment. Experimenting with dryland techniques, deep plowing, drought-resistant crops, it was a steep, steep learning curve.
So while many struggled with farming, a dynamic Black entrepreneurial class did emerge within these settlements.
Yes, absolutely. They established crucial businesses, general stores, hotels like the St. Francis Hotel in Nicodemus, other small enterprises, creating this vital local economy that served their community's needs, kept money circulating internally.
But it's an interesting nuance, isn't it? That the most economically successful Exodusters often didn't stay on the farms. They moved towards urban centers.
That's often the case, yeah. People gravitated towards places like Topeka, Kansas City. There, they found more consistent work as domestic servants, tradesmen, skilled construction laborers, contributing significantly to the growth of those cities, building a more stable financial foundation for their families.
And they used collective action too, didn't they, to overcome those economic disadvantages?
Frequently. A powerful testament to their community spirit. They formed mutual aid societies, farmers' associations to share resources, labor, support each other through the lean times. Benjamin Pap Singleton later tried to formalize this cooperative impulse with organizations like the Colored United Links, the CUL, aiming to build Black-owned businesses, vocational schools on a larger scale. That spirit of cooperation was just a crucial strategy for survival and advancement.
So the Exoduster economic experience, it presents this complex, maybe even contradictory legacy. You see this clear dichotomy between the ideal, the self-sufficient farmer on the homestead, that powerful dream pulling them west, and the more pragmatic reality of wage labor, business, often in urban or communal settings. The promise of land was the main pull, but the harsh reality of the plains environment, that chronic lack of capital, made the ideal incredibly difficult for many to achieve.
Our historical records clearly show the most successful Exodusters were those who relocated to urban centers and found employment.
So there's this tension in the narrative, isn't there, between the dream of land and the reality of urban opportunity. The dream that pulled them west wasn't necessarily the reality that allowed them to succeed.
Exactly. Their economic legacy is complex. It showcases the vital role of community-based enterprise, urban labor markets, which in many ways actually foreshadowed the later Great Migration's focus on urban industrial opportunities.
Which leads us right into what our sources call the frontier's crucible, the harsh realities, the immense challenges, and the incredible resilience they faced. A balanced look at the Exoduster experience has to go beyond the romance of the Promised Land and really confront the immense difficulties they endured on that unforgiving prairie.
Absolutely. Many Exodusters, especially those in that spontaneous 1879 wave, arrived in Kansas homeless, penniless, and ragged. Having spent every last cent just to get there, they lack financial resources, tools, farming equipment, everything needed to start a farm from scratch. This initial profound poverty was an almost insurmountable hurdle. It stranded thousands in river towns like St. Louis, overwhelming local charities trying to help.
And the environment itself, a profound shock, right?
Yeah.
Compared to the humid forested South.
A huge shock. Vast, flat, treeless landscapes, scorching summers, relentless heat, dust, harsh winter blizzards trapping them indoors, unpredictable cycles of drought that just devastated crops and morale, and the land they settled, as we said, often the least desirable, making farming this immense, ongoing, often heartbreaking challenge.
So the reality of Kansas often failed to live up to those enthusiastic promotional promises that had lured them there.
Often, yes. News eventually filtered back south, often carried by people who'd made the attempt and returned, reporting that, there was very little free land left and many Exodusters were still destitute after a year of arrival. That dose of sobering reality, probably more than anything else, cooled Kansas fever, led to the mass migration tapering off. The harsh truth started to outweigh the hopeful vision.
It's such a powerful case study, isn't it? The clash between a strong national myth, the idyllic opportunity-filled Wild West, and the brutal reality of environmental and economic hardship on the actual frontier. The movement's decline was a direct result of reality just starkly overtaking the myth. It also shows the power of information networks within the Black community, doesn't it?
It really does.
The same grassroots communication that fueled the migration also helped regulate it, or eventually end it, when the reports from the ground turned negative. The movement was kind of self-correcting based on lived truth.
And while Kansas was certainly more hospitable than the South, the idea of it being a complete sanctuary from racism, well, that proved to be an exaggeration. Exodusters, despite their hopes, often met with hostility and prejudice from white settlers, who viewed them as an unwelcome burden or economic competition, and who carried their own pre-existing racial biases.
White Kansans, alarmed by this sudden influx of thousands of impoverished migrants, sometimes openly demanded segregated communities, mirroring the very thing they fled.
Sadly, yes. The sheer numbers, especially in 1879, just overwhelmed the state's existing relief capabilities, its social infrastructure.
And even though some Kansas whites, some northern philanthropists were sympathetic and offered aid, officials in cities like St. Louis, just overwhelmed by the volume of refugees, actively discouraged Exodusters whenever possible, tried to divert them or send them back.
That happened too. The whole experience demonstrated that even if Kansas lacked the systematic, state-sanctioned, violent racism of the Jim Crow South, prejudice and resentment still persisted on the frontier. It was maybe a different flavor of hostility, but it was definitely present.
That's such a crucial point. The Exoduster experience in Kansas serves as this powerful reminder that racism, white hostility, they weren't just confined to the former Confederate states. It forced a national confrontation with the reality that prejudice was a pervasive American issue, manifesting differently but persistently, even on John Brown's sacred soil. They traded the state-sanctioned terror of the South for a less organized, but still very present, frontier prejudice, a significant nuance in our racial history.
So how on earth did they manage to endure? adapt. In the face of such profound challenges, their survival really depended on this crucial combination: some external aid and incredible internal strength and communal bonds. In response to that overwhelming 1879 humanitarian crisis, Governor John St. John established the Kansas Freedmen's Relief Association, the KFRA.
And that was run by philanthropists, funded by private donations.
Exactly. And the KFRA provided vital relief. They built temporary housing, the barracks in Topeka, a hospital, a central storehouse, distributed desperately needed food, clothing, supplies to thousands of destitute migrants. Without that immediate intervention, the humanitarian crisis would have been utterly catastrophic.
And support came from beyond Kansas, too.
It did, highlighting this broader network of solidarity. The Black community in St. Louis, for instance, bore a significant burden, helping stranded migrants, providing food, shelter where they could, and charities, often led by Quakers, other abolitionists from the North, even from England. They raised substantial funds, around $70,000, which was a huge sum back then to support the Exodusters' efforts.
But ultimately, the survival of communities like Nicodemus, it was really a profound testament to the absolute determination, the unwavering resilience of the settlers themselves, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Despite repeated droughts, devastating crop failures, persistent poverty, even the devastating blow of the railroad bypassing their town, which was a death sentence for many prairie settlements, they persevered. They kept building their own schools, churches, social organizations, truly creating deep roots in a land that tested them to their absolute limits. Their resolve was just extraordinary.
So their communities endured because of this dynamic mix. Timely but limited external aid, plus this deep wellspring of internal social capital, resilient will.
Exactly. The initial crisis would have been a complete disaster without the KFRA's crucial intervention. But long-term survival, the development of thriving communities that depended almost entirely on the internal structures the Exodusters built themselves, resilient mutual aid societies, strong church communities serving as spiritual and civic anchors, and just an unshakable collective will to succeed against all odds. Their legacy isn't just of victims rescued, it's of powerful agents who leveraged temporary support to build resilient, self-sustaining social structures and forge a new future for themselves.
The Exoduster movement, though it's often overshadowed by later, bigger events like the Great Migration, it's such a critical, pioneering chapter in the African-American struggle for freedom, not just a footnote, right? It was a crucial precedent, an enduring symbol of self-determination.
Absolutely. This movement was indeed the first general Black migration after the Civil War. It effectively established large-scale migration as a viable, powerful strategy to escape Southern oppression and seek opportunity elsewhere. It demonstrated to future generations of African Americans that leaving the South en masse was a powerful, even revolutionary option. It laid the psychological and strategic groundwork for the much larger Great Migration that would follow decades later.
That's a vital point. Before the Exodus, the main strategies for Black advancement were kind of confined to political participation, internal struggle within the South.
Stay and fight.
But the brutal failure of Reconstruction dismantling rights, unleashing terror, it just rendered that strategy futile for many. Exodusters pioneered this new radical strategy, voting with their feet. While it was smaller in scale, tens of thousands versus millions in the Great Migration, it entered the collective memory of African Americans as a viable, successful option for liberation.
Now, there were key differences, of course, between the Exodus and a later Great Migration. The Exoduster movement was primarily rural to rural, driven by that promise of agricultural independence, land ownership on the frontier.
Whereas the Great Migration?
The Great Migration, roughly 1916 to 1970, was largely rural to urban, millions of African Americans moving to northern, midwestern, western cities, primarily focused on industrial jobs and the perceived promise of greater social freedom in those cities.
But despite those operational differences, the core motivations, they were strikingly identical, weren't they?
Absolutely identical. Both movements represented this profound, desperate rejection of Southern oppression, driven by the urgent need to escape pervasive economic exploitation, systematic political disenfranchisement, widespread racial violence in the Jim Crow South. Both represented a powerful affirmation of that fundamental human right to free movement. To seek a better life, pursue self-determination.
And the Exoduster movement itself stands as this truly powerful expression of grassroots self-determination. It just directly challenged that paternalistic idea, held by many white people and even some black elites back then, that freed slaves were somehow incapable of intelligently assessing their own situations and acting decisively to improve their lives.
Yeah, it completely refutes that. This was unequivocally a movement by, of, and for the Southern Black working class, ordinary people making extraordinary decisions for their own liberation.
And the choice to move to Kansas, it was deliberate, made in preference to other options being debated at the time. Some leaders explored migrating to Liberia, for instance.
But that was seen as largely impractical for the masses.
Right. And crucially, the Exodusters consciously rejected the advice of respected national leaders like Frederick Douglass, who argued they should stay and fight in the South. They chose a different path.
And their choice represented this pragmatic, distinct form of Black nationalism, focused on building autonomous communities within America. It was a kind of third path, wasn't it? Distinct from both the ongoing struggle for integration into broader American society and the back to Africa separatism people like Marcus Garvey advocated later. The Exodusters leveraged existing American laws like the Homestead Act and national ideals, the pioneering spirit, to create distinct, self-governing Black spaces right here in the American West. This domestic separatism or land-based nationalism, it's a significant, often overlooked contribution to the whole spectrum of Black political thought.
And at its most fundamental level, the Exodus was just this forceful assertion of one of the most basic rights denied under slavery: the right to freedom of movement, a physical, symbolic expression of their new citizenship, their inherent right to self-determination, to choose where and how they would live free.
And the Exodusters' enduring legacy. It's perhaps most tangibly preserved right there in Nicodemus, Kansas, deservedly designated a National Historic Landmark in 1976. And then, even more significantly, a National Historic Site, part of the National Park Service in 1996. That national recognition ensures its preservation, highlights its importance.
And today, those 5 remaining historic buildings, the Township Hall, the AME Church, First Baptist Church, the St. Francis Hotel, the school, they're carefully protected, interpreted as monuments to the movement, allowing visitors like us to glimpse the incredible resilience, the determination that shaped that community.
And despite its relatively small population today, Nicodemus remains a living community, home to many direct descendants of the original settlers. Hundreds more return every year for the Emancipation celebration.
Wow.
A powerful gathering where they renew family ties, share stories, honor their remarkable heritage. It's a vibrant living link to the past.
And what's particularly fascinating,
Yeah.
descendants of other now vanished Exoduster communities, like the Vauta settlement, they're actively researching their history now.
Yes, reconnecting with lost relatives, meticulously uncovering a past that was often left untold by generations who maybe experienced its hardships and prefer to look forward. This living link ensures the Exoduster story isn't just some dusty historical note. It's a continuing source of identity, pride for countless families.
So ultimately, the Exodusters' modern legacy, it's this active, ongoing process, isn't it? Rediscovery, reclamation by descendants, by historians.
Exactly. This tireless work is transforming what were once forgotten local histories into this powerful national narrative of resilience, self-determination, the unyielding pursuit of freedom. This ongoing process elevates isolated family histories, little-known local landmarks, into pieces of a larger, nationally significant story, making the Exodusters' ultimate legacy dynamic actively amplified and more relevant than ever today.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this extraordinary story of the Exodusters mean for us today? For you listening right now, their journey is just this profound testament to courage, resilience, and unquenchable thirst for autonomy. It was a conscious, organized act of political resistance against a comprehensive system of re-enslavement that sought to deny their very humanity.
Their relentless fight for self-determination, their unwavering commitment to building community, their pursuit of economic independence. It resonates so powerfully with contemporary struggles for equity, for justice, all around the world. It serves as this stark reminder that freedom is often hard-won, rarely just given, and it requires ongoing vigilance, courageous action, and just an unbreakable spirit.
So what does it truly take to be free? And what other forgotten stories of resilience still await our deep dive?
This story isn't over. Subscribe to carry it forward.